On October 23rd, the remains of 10 teenagers who had disappeared over the past year were found in the basement of an abandoned house on the outskirts of Detroit. But before this horrific discovery, the city had been living in fear, unaware that the nightmare was so close. The autumn wind blew yellowed leaves through the streets, as if foreshadowing disaster. Detroit, once proud of its automotive industry, was now going through difficult times, and the disappearances of teenagers only exacerbated the general sense of unease. Over the past 12 months, 10 young people between the ages of 14 and 17 had disappeared without a trace from the city. All of them were students at local schools, all from well-to-do families, all simply vanished into thin air, leaving no trace or explanation behind. Parents began to walk their children to school and pick them up after class as if they were in kindergarten. Evening walks became a rarity, and curfews became an unspoken rule in every family. Police patrols roamed the streets more often than usual, but this did little to reassure the anxious residents. Fear settled in people's hearts and poisoned every day with anxious anticipation. 15-year-old Sean Stewart felt this atmosphere of terror particularly acutely. A tall, thin boy with intelligent dark eyes, he was a junior at Martin Luther King High School. 2 weeks ago, his best friend, Tyrone Davis, had disappeared. They had known each other since kindergarten, played basketball together, studied for exams, and made plans for the future. Tyrone was a cheerful and sociable boy who dreamed of becoming a journalist. He never did anything dangerous and always warned his parents if he was going to be out later than usual. But on October 17th, Tyrone simply did not come home after school. He was last seen at the bus stop on Woodward Avenue around 4 p.m. He waved goodbye to a classmate as he boarded the number 12 bus that was supposed to take him home. But he never made it home. The bus arrived on schedule, the passengers got off, but Tyrone was not among them. Sean was deeply affected by his friend's disappearance. He stopped sleeping normally, constantly replaying his last conversation with Tyrone in his head, trying to find some clue to the mystery. His friends discussed various theories. Maybe Tyrone had run away from home, maybe something bad had happened to him, or maybe he had been kidnapped, like the other missing teenagers. But all their assumptions hung in the air without any evidence. Sean's parents, Robert and Lisa Stewart, were understanding of their son's grief, but their own anxiety about his safety grew with each passing day. Robert, a strong 44-year-old man, worked as a mechanic at an automobile factory. His hands, covered with old scars from working with metal, trembled as he read the latest reports of missing children in the newspaper. Lisa, a 40-year-old nurse at a local clinic, had seen enough human pain to understand what the families of missing teenagers were going through. She prayed every night that this nightmare would pass their family by. On October 30th, the tension in the Stewarts' house reached its peak. At dinner, Lisa once again started talking about how Sean needed to be more careful, not stay out after school, and always let them know where he was. Robert supported his wife, adding that these were dangerous times and it was important to use your head. "Mom, Dad, I'm not a kid," Sean said irritably, putting down his fork. "I'm 15 years old, I can take care of myself." "Tyrone was 15 too," Lisa replied quietly. "And where is he now?" Those words hit Sean like a slap in the face. He jumped up from the table, knocking over his chair. "Don't you dare say that!" he shouted. "Tyrone isn't to blame for what happened to him, and it's not my fault either." "Son, we're not saying it's your fault," Robert tried to calm him down. "We're just worried." "You're suffocating me," Sean continued to shout. "I can't breathe in this house. Do you want me to be locked up like in prison?" "We want you to live," Lisa said, her voice breaking with tears. Sean looked at his parents and saw genuine fear in their eyes, but teenage stubbornness proved stronger than understanding. "I need to think," he muttered and headed for the door. "Sean, don't go," his father pleaded. "Let's talk calmly." But the boy was already grabbing his jacket and running out of the house, slamming the door behind him. The cold autumn air hit his face, and he paused for a moment, feeling his anger gradually give way to remorse. but his pride prevented him from going back and apologizing. Sean took out his phone and called his girlfriend, Keisha Williams. Keisha went to the same school in 10th grade. She was a smart and calm girl who always found the right words in difficult moments. "Hi," Sean said when she picked up the phone. "Can we meet?" "I need to talk to someone." "Sure," Keisha replied without hesitation. "What's wrong?" "I had a fight with my parents." "Can we meet at Hart Plaza Park?" Half an hour later, they met at the park entrance. Keisha was a petite girl with intelligent brown eyes and short curly hair. She listened attentively to Sean's story about his argument with his parents, without interrupting or offering advice. "They're right to be worried about you," she said when he finished, "and you're right not to want to live in fear. It's a difficult situation. I understand that they're worried," Sean sighed, "but I feel like I'm in a cage, and I can't stop thinking about Tyrone. Where is he? What happened to him? Maybe there's something we can do to find him." "The police are looking for him," Keisha reminded him. "They're professionals." "What if the police are missing something?" Sean said thoughtfully. "What if the answer is right there and we can't see it?" They walked through the deserted evening streets, discussing the disappearance of Tyrone and the other teenagers. Time flew by, and when Sean looked at his watch, it was already midnight. "Damn," he said. "His parents will be even more worried." "Let me walk with you," Keisha offered. They turned into an alley between Cass Avenue and 2nd Street, where it was quieter and they could talk without being overheard. Suddenly, ahead of them, near the trash cans behind an old brick building, they saw the silhouette of a man. He was clearly throwing something away, looking around periodically. "That's strange," Sean whispered. "What is he doing there at this hour?" "Maybe he's just taking out the trash," Keisha suggested, but her voice sounded uncertain. They stopped in the shadows and watched. The man didn't seem to notice them. He was taking various items out of a large dark bag and throwing them into the bin. Even in the dim light of the street lamp, it was clear that this was no ordinary rubbish. The man handled the items carefully, as if they could give him away. After a few minutes, the stranger finished his business, looked around once more, and quickly walked to a car parked nearby. In the light of the street lamp, Sean and Keisha could make out his profile: tall, middle-aged, wearing glasses. "I think I know him," Sean said quietly. "He looks like Mr. Kennedy from our school." "Are you sure?" Keisha whispered. "It's dark. Maybe you're mistaken." "I don't know, but his gait is very similar. And the car is the same as his eye." The man started the engine and drove away, leaving them puzzled. Sean and Keisha waited a few more minutes to make sure he wasn't coming back, then cautiously approached the dumpster. "Maybe we shouldn't," Keisha hesitated. "What if it's dangerous?" "Let's just take a look," Sean insisted. "If he was throwing something away secretly, it must be something important." He turned on the flashlight on his phone and looked into the bin. There was ordinary household waste on top, but when he carefully moved the bag aside, he saw a familiar red knit cap with the Detroit Pistons basketball team logo. "Oh my God," he gasped. "That's Tyrone's hat." Keisha shone her phone light on it, and they both confirmed that it was indeed the hat Tyrone wore all the time. His mother had knitted it herself, and it had a small hole from a cigarette that a friend had accidentally burned into it last winter. "We have to take it," Sean said, pulling the hat out of the trash. "It's evidence." "What if that man comes back?" Keisha asked fearfully. "He won't. He's gone far away. But we have to remember this place and time." They quickly left the alley, taking Tyrone's hat with them and a terrible suspicion that their respected history teacher, Bruce Kennedy, might be involved in their friend's disappearance. Sean's mind was racing with thoughts that they might have witnessed something terrible that would change their lives forever. They hardly spoke on the way home, each lost in their own thoughts. Keisha glanced at the hat in Sean's hands from time to time, unable to believe that this was really happening. Sean tried to remember everything he knew about Mr. Kennedy, a calm, intelligent teacher who was respected by both students and colleagues. When Sean cautiously opened the front door of his house, the kitchen light was still on. It was already 1:30 in the morning, and he knew his parents had been awake waiting for him to return. Tyrone's hat was in his jacket pocket, and he could feel its weight, a reminder of the terrible discovery he had made that night. "Sean?" his mother called softly from the kitchen. He sighed and headed there, preparing for another conversation about safety and responsibility. His parents were sitting at the table with cups of cold coffee. Their faces were tired and worn out from worry. "Son," Robert began, standing up to meet him, "we were so worried." "Where were you?" "I was out with Keisha," Sean replied, avoiding their gaze. "I'm sorry I left so abruptly." "And I'm sorry for yelling." Lisa stood up and hugged her son, holding him close. "We're to blame too," she said. "We put too much pressure on you." "But you understand. We're so afraid of losing you." "I know, Mom." Sean felt a lump rising in his throat. "I'm afraid too. For myself, for you, for all of us." Robert put his hand on his son's shoulder. "Sit down. Let's talk calmly. Would you like some tea?" Sean nodded and sat down at the table. While his father was making tea, he thought about how to tell him what had happened that night. It sounded unbelievable even to him, a respected teacher throwing out a missing student's belongings in the middle of the night. Who would believe such a story? "Dad," he began, when Robert placed a steaming mug in front of him, "something strange happened last night." His parents exchanged glances and looked intently at their son. "What happened?" Lisa asked. "Keisha and I were walking around town and happened to see a man throwing something into a trash can. It was around 11:30, near the alley between Cass Avenue and 2nd Street. He was acting very strangely, constantly looking back, as if he was afraid of being seen." "What's so strange about that?" Robert asked. "Maybe he was just taking out the trash." "At midnight?" Sean objected. "And not from his house, but brought it in his car." Dad listened to the end. He took Tyrone's red hat out of his pocket and placed it on the table. His parents stared at it in shock. "This is Tyrone's hat," Sean said quietly, "the one his mother knitted. Remember the cigarette burn? There it is." Lisa picked up the hat, examining every detail. "My God," she whispered, "it really is his hat." "I remember how proud he was of it." "Where did you get it?" Robert asked sternly. "We went to the dumpster after the man left and found it there, among other things," Sean explained. "Dad, I think this man knows what happened to Tyrone." "Did you get a good look at the man?" his mother asked. Sean paused, realizing that the most incredible part of his story was about to be told. "We couldn't see him very well, it was dark." "But I thought it was Mr. Kennedy, our history teacher." There was a silence. His parents exchanged glances, and Sean saw disbelief in their eyes. "Son," Robert began cautiously, "are you sure? Bruce Kennedy is a respected teacher. He's been at the school for 15 years and has an excellent reputation." "I know how it sounds," Sean insisted, "but the gate was very similar. And the car too. A dark blue sedan, just like his." "There are hundreds of dark blue sedans in the city," Lisa objected. "And in the dark, it's easy to mistake someone's appearance." "Then explain to me how a random person got Tyrone's hat," Sean said heatedly. "It didn't just fall into the trash can by itself." Robert rubbed his chin thoughtfully. As a mechanic, he was used to analyzing facts and looking for logical explanations. "Okay," he said finally. "Let's say you really did see someone throw away Tyrone's things. But that doesn't mean that person is involved in his disappearance. Maybe he found those things somewhere and decided to get rid of them. In the middle of the night? Secretly?" Sean persisted. "Dad, if you found the belongings of a missing child, what would you do?" "I'd take them to the police," Robert replied without hesitation. "Exactly," Sean exclaimed. "Any normal person would do that. But this person threw them in the trash as if they wanted to hide the evidence." Lisa studied the hat carefully, turning it over in her hands. Even if we assume you're right about Mr. Kennedy, she said slowly, we need more solid evidence. Accusing someone of such a terrible crime based on vague suspicions. Mom, I'm not accusing him, Sean interrupted. I'm just saying what I saw. It's up to the police to decide. You know what? Robert said decisively. Tomorrow morning, we'll go to Tyrone's parents. Let them confirm that it's his hat. And then, we'll decide what to do next. The next morning, on Saturday, the Stewart family went to the Davises' house. Tyrone's house was in a neighboring neighborhood, a small 2-story red brick building. Tyrone's mother, Gloria Davis, was an elementary school teacher, and his father, Michael Davis, was an electrician. In the 2 weeks since their son's disappearance, they had aged noticeably and looked haggard. Gloria opened the door and was surprised to see the Stewart family on the doorstep. Robert, Lisa, Sean, she said in a tired voice. Come in. Has something happened? Gloria, we need to talk to you and Michael, Robert said seriously. It's about Tyrone. Both families gathered in the living room. Michael, a tall, thin man with graying temples, listened attentively to Sean's account of the night's events. When the boy took out the hat, Gloria gasped and pressed her hands to her lips. That's his hat, she said in a trembling voice. I knitted it myself last winter. Remember, he was so proud of it, he wore it all the time. And the hole? Michael asked, picking up the hat. Yes, that's from his friend Derek's cigarette. Tyrone was very upset at the time, but then he said that now the hat was special. So it's definitely his, Lisa confirmed. But where did you find it? Gloria asked, turning to Sean. Sean recounted the night's incident in detail once again, leaving out no details. Michael listened attentively, asking clarifying questions from time to time. You say the man was tall, middle-aged, and wore glasses? He asked. Yes, Sean nodded. And I thought it was Mr. Kennedy from our school. Bruce Kennedy? Gloria was surprised. But he's Tyrone's teacher. He always spoke highly of him. That's why it's so strange, Robert said. If Sean really saw Kennedy, why would a respected teacher throw away his students' things in the middle of the night? Maybe there's some explanation, Gloria suggested. Maybe he found the hat at school and decided to throw it in the trash instead of giving it to us or the police? Michael asked sharply. Gloria, use your head. If a teacher finds a missing student's belongings, he immediately reports it to the authorities. Then what should we do? She asked, confused. Go to the police, Michael said firmly. We have material evidence and a witness. Let them figure it out. But what if Sean was wrong about the man? Lisa worried. We could ruin an innocent man's reputation. What if he wasn't wrong? Michael countered. Then we could save the lives of other children. The discussion continued for another hour. The parents weighed the pros and cons, afraid of making the wrong decision. Sean sat silently, feeling responsible for what would happen next. On the one hand, he wasn't entirely sure that he had seen Mr. Kennedy. On the other hand, Tyrone's hat in the trash can was an indisputable fact. Finally, Robert made a decision. We're going to the police, he said. We have evidence, we have a witness, we have a specific time and place. Let the professionals decide whether it's worth investigating. But first, I want to talk to Sean alone again, Lisa added. Son, do you understand the seriousness of the situation? If you have even the slightest doubt about what you saw, tell us now. Sean looked at Tyrone's grief-stricken mother, at his father, who was trying his best to hold on, his parents, who trusted his words. He closed his eyes and mentally replayed the events of that night once more. I saw a man throwing away Tyrone's things, he said slowly. That's a fact. The man was tall, middle-aged, wore glasses, and drove a dark blue sedan. I thought it was Mr. Kennedy. But I could have been wrong in the dark. However, everything else is true. That's enough, Michael said firmly. Have the police check everyone who fits that description. 2 hours later, they were sitting in the waiting room of the police station on Bubian Street. The officer on duty, Sergeant Williams, listened to their story and said that the case would be handed over to a detective specializing in missing persons. Detective Morrison is busy with another case right now, the sergeant explained, but he'll be free in half an hour and we'll be able to see you. The wait was agonizingly long. Sean was nervous, imagining how he would tell his story to the police. What if the detective didn't believe him? What if he decided it was just the fantasies of a frightened teenager? Finally, Detective Eric Morrison appeared, a man of about 38, of medium height, with intelligent gray eyes and a short graying beard. He had been working in the Major Crimes Division for 12 years and had a reputation as an attentive and conscientious investigator. "The Stewart family?" he asked them. "I'm Detective Morrison. Please come into my office." The detective's office was small and austere. A desk, a few chairs, a map of the city on the wall, and a board with photos of missing teenagers. Sean saw Tyrone's picture among them and felt his heart sink. "So," Morrison began, opening his notebook, "tell me what happened." Sean recounted the events of the night in detail, without omitting a single detail. The detective listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "You said the man was wearing glasses?" he asked. "What shape were they?" "Rectangular with dark frames, I think," Sean replied. "But I saw him from a distance and in poor lighting." "And the car?" "Did you remember the license plate number?" "No, unfortunately. It was too dark and I didn't think about it." "And why did you decide it was your teacher?" Sean thought for a moment. His gait seemed familiar, and his figure too. Mr. Kennedy is quite tall, wears glasses, and drives a dark sedan. But I'm not saying it was definitely him. It just seemed that way. The detective carefully examined Tyrone's cap and placed it in a transparent bag for physical evidence. "This evidence is really important," he said. "We'll check it for DNA and fingerprints. Maybe we'll find something else." "What about Mr. Kennedy?" Robert asked. "Are you going to check him out?" Morrison hesitated before answering. "You see, Mr. Stewart, accusing someone of involvement in the disappearance of children is a very serious matter, especially if that person is a respected member of the community. We need more substantial evidence than the vague suspicions of a teenager." "But will you at least talk to him?" Lisa insisted. "We'll do the necessary checks," the detective replied evasively. "In the meantime, I ask that you not tell anyone about this conversation. If the information leaks out prematurely, it could interfere with the investigation. We understand," Michael said. "But I hope you'll take this case seriously." "I assure you, Mr. Davis, we are doing everything we can to find your son and the other missing children," Morrison said firmly. "Every lead is important to us." The detective wrote down the contact information of everyone present, took Sean's detailed statement, and assured them that the case would be thoroughly investigated. "If you remember any more details or see anything suspicious, call me immediately," he said, handing Sean his business card. "Don't try to investigate on your own. It could be dangerous leaving the police station." Everyone felt mixed emotions. On the one hand, they had done what they thought was right. On the other hand, it was unclear whether it would lead to any results. "Do you think he believed us?" Sean asked his father quietly. "I think so," Robert replied. "But the police can't act on suspicion alone. They need facts." "I hope we did the right thing," Lisa sighed. "We did everything we could," Michael Davis said, hugging his wife. "Now all we can do is wait and pray." After the Stewarts and the Davises left, Detective Eric Morrison remained in his office, carefully studying the testimony records and the package with Tyrone's cap. It was already dark outside, but he was in no hurry to go home. The case of the missing teenagers had been on his mind for several months, and now he had his first real lead. The next day, on Monday morning, Morrison presented the case to his colleagues at the department's planning meeting. The reaction was predictable and disappointing. "Eric, are you serious?" Detective James Foster, his longtime partner, shook his head in disbelief. A 15-year-old boy saw someone in the dark from a distance and decided it was his teacher? Based on that, you want to start an investigation against a respected educator? "We have physical evidence," Morrison reminded them, pointing to the bag with the hat, the missing child's clothing found in a trash can. "Which could have ended up there in 1,000 different ways," objected Sergeant Carter, the head of the department. "Maybe someone found it on the street and threw it away. Maybe the kid lost it himself, and his friend is just imagining things." "Sergeant, the victim's family confirmed the authenticity of the hat," Morrison insisted, "and the behavior of the man Sean saw was definitely suspicious. Who throws things away in the middle of the night, constantly looking over their shoulder?" "Eric, I understand your desire to find the culprit," Carter said gently. "We all want to solve this case. But Bruce Kennedy? He's been working at the school for 15 years and has an impeccable reputation. Not a single complaint, not a single suspicious incident. Are you suggesting we ruin a man's life based on the vague testimony of a teenager?" "I'm suggesting we check the information," Morrison replied stubbornly. "Isn't that our job?" "Our job is not to create problems for law-abiding citizens," Foster said sharply, "especially prominent members of society like Kennedy. He has connections in City Hall, on the school board. If we start digging without good reason, we ourselves could be removed from the case." Detective Rose Adams, the only woman in the department who had been silent until then, finally spoke up. "What if the guy is right? What if we're missing a real lead because we're afraid of hurting someone's feelings?" "Rose, be realistic," Carter sighed. "Even if we assume that Kennedy really did throw things away, that doesn't make him the killer. Maybe he has a perfectly innocent explanation. Then why not ask him?" Adams suggested. "Because if he's innocent, we'll ruin his reputation," Foster replied. "And if he is guilty, our questions will alert him, and he will destroy all the evidence." Morrison listened to the argument with growing irritation. He understood his colleague's concerns, but his intuition told him that Sean Stewart had seen something important. "All right," he said finally. "I won't question Kennedy yet. But I want to put him under discreet surveillance. Just check his usual routine, see if there's anything suspicious." "Eric," Carter said cautiously, "we have no grounds for official surveillance." "Then I'll do it unofficially, in my spare time," Morrison replied firmly. "I'll watch him for a few days, and if I don't find anything, I'll drop the matter for good." Carter paused, weighing his options. "All right," he finally agreed, "but only unofficially, only in your free time and no records in the file. If anything goes wrong, you acted on your own initiative." That same evening, Morrison parked his personal car 2 blocks from Bruce Kennedy's house on Palmer Avenue. The teacher's house was a typical 2-story building in a quiet middle-class neighborhood. A well-kept lawn, neat flower beds, a freshly painted fence. Everything looked impeccable and respectable. Kennedy returned home around 6 in the evening, as befits a respectable teacher. The lights came on in the windows, smoke rose from the chimney, a normal evening for a normal person. Morrison waited until midnight, but saw nothing suspicious. The next 3 days passed in a similar fashion. Kennedy led a measured life, home, school, home. On weekends, he went to the grocery store, mowed the lawn, and read on the porch. No secret meetings, no suspicious trips. Morrison was beginning to think that his colleagues were right and that he was wasting his time. But on Thursday evening, something changed. Kennedy left his house around 9 o'clock, which was unusual for him. He got into his dark blue sedan and drove not toward the school or the store, but toward the outskirts of town. Morrison followed him cautiously, trying to keep a safe distance. Kennedy drove across town and turned into an industrial area where old factory buildings alternated with vacant lots and abandoned houses. The teacher stopped near a small 1-story house on 5 Mile Road. The building looked abandoned, boarded up windows, peeling paint, a yard overgrown with weeds. but Kennedy unlocked the door and went inside as if it were his second home. Morrison parked in the shade of an old warehouse and watched. A few minutes later, a dim light came on in the house. Kennedy stayed there for about 2 hours, then came out, carefully locked the door, and drove home. The detective stayed for another half hour, studying the area. The neighborhood was deserted, with the nearest neighbors several blocks away. It was the perfect place for secret activities. The next day, Morrison checked the property. It turned out that the house on 5 Mile Road had been registered in Bruce Kennedy's name for 3 years. He had bought it from the city for a nominal sum as an abandoned property, supposedly for renovation. This discovery made the detective's heart beat faster. Why would a respected teacher need a second home in a rundown neighborhood, and why did he visit it secretly at night? Morrison realized that he now had grounds for an official investigation. He immediately went to Judge Harrison, known for his integrity and attention to detail. "Detective Morrison," said the judge after listening carefully to the facts, "you have witness testimony, physical evidence, and suspicious behavior by the alleged suspect. That's enough for a search warrant." "Thank you, Your Honor." Morrison sighed with relief. "But keep in mind," the judge warned, "if you find nothing in the house, it will be a very unpleasant situation for everyone. Make sure the search is conducted as thoroughly as possible." Early Friday morning, a team of investigators led by Morrison arrived at the house on 5 Mile Road. They were accompanied by a team of forensic scientists and dogs trained to search for human remains. The front door gave way on the first try. The lock was good quality, but the door was old. Inside, the house looked deceptively normal. A small living room, kitchen, bedroom. Everything was clean and tidy, but somehow lifeless. "Let's start with the basement," Morrison ordered. The staircase to the basement was narrow and creaky. Downstairs, they were met by a sweet, nauseating smell that experienced police officers recognize without fail. The smell of decay. "My God," whispered one of the detectives, turning on a powerful flashlight. What they saw exceeded their worst expectations. The basement had been turned into a kind of tomb. Metal shelves lined the walls, neatly arranged with the personal belongings of the missing teenagers: clothes, jewelry, school supplies, cell phones. Everything was labeled and dated with meticulous precision. In the far corner of the basement, behind a makeshift partition, they found human remains. Forensic experts counted 10 sets of bones, exactly the number of teenagers who had disappeared over the past year. "Call for backup," Morrison ordered in a trembling voice, "and a medical examiner, immediately." While the forensic experts worked at the crime scene, Morrison coordinated Kennedy's arrest. At that time, the teacher was teaching a history class to the 11th grade, the same class Sean Stewart was in. "Today's lesson plan," Kennedy said calmly, standing at the blackboard, "is to study the causes and consequences of the American Civil War. Open your textbooks to page 147. Sean sat in the 3rd row and tried to concentrate on the lesson, but his thoughts kept returning to the events of the past week. Several days had passed since he gave his statement to the police, but there had been no news. Sometimes it seemed to him that he had made it all up, that that night had never happened. Suddenly, the classroom door burst open and 4 uniformed police officers entered. The class froze in surprise. Kennedy turned to them with a puzzled expression on his face. "Gentlemen, can I help you?" he asked politely. "Bruce Kennedy?" the lead officer said sternly. "Yes, that's me. What's the matter?" "You are under arrest on suspicion of murdering 10 minors. You have the right to remain silent." The students gasped. Someone screamed. Several girls began to cry. Sean sat frozen, unable to believe what was happening. Kennedy turned pale, but remained outwardly calm. "This must be some kind of mistake," he said, but his voice was trembling. "I demand a lawyer." "Of course," replied the police officer, handcuffing the teacher. "All your rights will be respected." As Kennedy was led out of the classroom, he glanced quickly at his students. His eyes met Sean's for a moment, and the boy saw something cold and malicious in them, not at all the expression he was used to seeing in his teacher. The rest of the day at school was chaotic. Classes were canceled, and parents were called to pick up their children early. Psychologists tried to help the students cope with the shock. The school principal issued a statement expressing his shock and promising full cooperation with law enforcement. Sean returned home in a state of emotional turmoil. His parents already knew what had happened. The news of Kennedy's arrest had spread instantly throughout the city. "Son," his mother hugged him. "How are you feeling?" "I don't know," Sean replied honestly. "On the one hand, I'm glad they caught the killer. On the other hand, he was our teacher. A man we trusted. You did the right thing by telling them what you saw," his father said. "If it weren't for you, he could have killed more children." In the evening, the doorbell rang. It was Detective Morrison. He looked tired, but his eyes shone with the satisfaction of a man who had done his duty. "May I come in?" he asked. "I'd like to talk to Sean." They sat down in the living room, and the detective gave a detailed account of how events had unfolded since the report was filed. "In the basement of the Kennedy house, we found the remains of all 10 missing teenagers," he said, including Tyrone. "We also found the victim's personal belongings and diaries in which he described his crimes." Lisa pressed her hand to her chest, and Robert shook his head grimly. "How long had this been going on?" he asked. "According to the records, he committed his first murder 3 years ago," Morrison replied. "But there were not 10 victims. There were 13. 3 teenagers had disappeared earlier, but at the time their disappearances were attributed to other causes." "My God," whispered Lisa. 13 children. Morrison turned to Sean. "I want to thank you," he said seriously. "Your courage and observation skills helped stop a serial killer. You know, many adult police officers didn't believe your testimony. They considered it unreliable. But you believed me," said Sean. "Why?" "Because there was truth in your words," replied the detective. "And because I remember what it's like to be a teenager who adults don't believe. When I was your age, I also witnessed a crime, but the adults said I was imagining things. The criminal was never caught." "What will happen to Mr. Kennedy now?" asked Sean. "He'll stand trial," replied Morrison. "With this much evidence, he has no chance of avoiding punishment. Most likely, he'll get life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." "What about his family?" "He has a wife," Lisa remembered. "Mrs. Kennedy is in the hospital right now," the detective said sadly. The news about her husband was a heavy blow to her. She had no idea about his second life. Morrison stood up, ready to leave. "Sean," he said goodbye. "You've shown the qualities of a real detective. If you ever want to work in the police, come see me. Law enforcement needs people like you." After the detective left, the family sat in silence for a long time, digesting everything they had heard. Finally, Sean broke the silence. "I still can't believe it's true. Mr. Kennedy seemed so normal, so human." "Son," his father said gently, "evil doesn't always look scary. Sometimes it hides behind a mask of normality and respectability. The important thing is that you were able to see the truth and weren't afraid to speak up about it. Now the families of all the children who died will finally get answers," his mother added, "and they will be able to bury their children in a humane way. That's important too." Sean nodded, realizing that despite the horror of the situation, justice had prevailed. The town could finally breathe a sigh of relief. The nightmare was over, the killer had been caught, and the children were safe. But deep down, the boy knew that this story had changed him forever. He had seen that evil can lurk where you least expect it, and that sometimes teenagers see things that adults miss. It was a difficult but important lesson.